Infertile mountain man paid $1 for orphan twins. That's what the town whispered, staring as he walked those children through the dust, a silver coin lighter and a lifetime heavier. Folks thought he was broken, barren, too far gone for second chances. But when he opened that cabin door, something deeper than blood began to stir. What he did next didn't just raise eyebrows. It shook the church pews, the courthouse steps, and every quiet soul watching from behind lace curtains. A storm was coming, and the past wasn't done with him yet. The question ain't how much a dollar can buy, but how far a man will go to keep what matters most. When the law rides in, who'll stand with the man no one expected, and the family he never thought he'd have? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The gray clouds hung low over Timber Hollow that spring morning in 1881, matching Caleb Briscoe's mood as he trudged through the muddy street toward the trading post. His worn boots left deep prints in the earth, and the familiar weight of pelts pressed against his back. The weekly market day brought the usual bustle of wagons and traders, but Caleb kept to himself, as he always did. Inside the trading post, the floorboards creaked beneath his feet. He laid his pelts on the counter without a word, letting the quality of his work speak for itself. The trader, used to Caleb's silence, counted out flour, ammunition, and salt in exchange. Caleb nodded his thanks, gathering his supplies into his pack with careful movements. The bang of the auction bell drew him outside, though he hadn't planned to stay. Something made him pause near the livery stable, where a small crowd had gathered. Through the press of bodies, he spotted a wagon woman, her face gaunt and pale. She pressed a bloodied rag to her mouth between rattling coughs that shook her thin frame. $1, she wheezed, gripping the shoulders of two small children. Just $1 for the pair. The twins couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The boy clutched his sister's hand, his mouth working soundlessly as he tried to speak. The girl stood still as stone, her eyes wide and empty, not making a sound. Their clothes hung loose on their small frames, patched and dirty. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Folks shifted their feet and looked away, some muttering excuses under their breath. The sheriff, standing near the livery door, turned his back on the scene, his shoulders stiff with discomfort. Caleb felt something stir in his chest, an ache he'd tried to bury years ago. His hand moved to his pocket where a single silver dollar lay, warm against his palm. He'd been saving it for lamp oil, but now, before he could think better of it, his boots were moving through the crowd. The woman's desperate eyes met his, and he saw in them the shadow of death. Without a word, he held out the silver dollar. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The woman's trembling fingers closed around the coin, and tears spilled down her hollow cheeks. "God bless you, mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Caleb shrugged off his buffalo coat, the familiar weight falling from his shoulders. He knelt down, wrapping it around the children's small forms. The coat swallowed them up, making them look even tinier. The boy's attempted words came out as broken sounds while his sister remained silent, but their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and desperate hope. "Come along then," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. He helped them climb onto his pack mule, securing them carefully. The animal shifted under the new weight, but stayed steady, as reliable as always. Behind him, the whispers started. "Has old Briscoe gone mad? Poor man, living alone too long. Those children will never survive up in Timber Hollow. What does a mountain man know about raising little ones?" Caleb ignored them all, though each word stung like nettle. He'd heard worse in his time, seen the way folks looked at a man who couldn't give his wife children, watched his marriage crumble under the weight of that failure. But something about these two small souls, abandoned and unwanted like himself, called to the empty places in his heart. The boy tried to speak again, managing only a stuttered "th-th-th," but Caleb waited patiently. Finally, the child gave up, slumping against his sister. She wrapped her arm around him, her silence a different kind than her brother's, deeper, chosen rather than fought against. Caleb led the mule away from the livery, away from the stares and whispers. The morning mist clung to their clothes as they started the long trek back to his cabin. He didn't know the first thing about raising children, but he knew about survival, about building things with careful hands, about the patience needed to trap and hunt. Maybe that would be enough for a start. The twins huddled together in his buffalo coat, and Caleb felt the weight of their trust settle on his shoulders, heavier than any pack of pelts, more precious than any silver dollar. Behind them, the town of Timber Hollow grew quiet, and ahead lay the mountain trail home, where 3 lost souls would have to learn to become something like a family. The mountain trail wound higher into the afternoon shadows, narrow and treacherous beneath the mule's careful hooves. Caleb led the animal by its worn leather reins, pausing often to check on his small passengers. The twins sat quietly atop the bundled furs, wrapped tight in his buffalo coat against the cooling air. Every so often, a loose stone would clatter down the steep slope, making Eli clutch his sister's hand tighter. The setting sun painted long shadows across the pass, and a chill wind whistled through the pines. Caleb's boots crunched steadily on the rocky path, the familiar sound somehow different now that he wasn't walking alone. He found himself listening for any sign of distress from the children, though they remained as quiet as mountain shadows. "Thank you, mister," Eli whispered suddenly, his voice barely louder than the wind. The words came out broken but clear, and Caleb's heart clenched at the earnest gratitude in the boy's tone. He nodded, not trusting his own voice. Beside her brother, Gracie hadn't spoken a word since leaving town, but her small fingers were wrapped tight around Caleb's old powder horn. She'd found it among his supplies and hadn't let go since. The worn leather strap hung loose around her neck, the horn itself nearly as big as her chest, but she clutched it like it might save her from drowning. The last rays of sunlight were fading when they finally crested the ridge. His cabin sat tucked against the mountainside, rough-hewn logs silvered with age. Smoke from a morning fire still curled faintly from the stone chimney. To Caleb, it had always looked lonely against the vast wilderness. Tonight, somehow, it looked like shelter. He helped the children down from the mule, their legs wobbling after the long ride. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark. Caleb moved with practiced efficiency, striking a match to the kindling he'd laid that morning in the pot-bellied stove. The flames caught quickly, hungry for fuel. The twins huddled close to the growing warmth, still wrapped in his coat. They watched his every move as he pulled out his Dutch oven and started a pot of beans, adding a pinch of salt and a strip of dried venison. The familiar motions of mixing cornmeal and water for bread felt strange under their intent gaze. As he worked, unwanted memories crept in like evening shadows. Another kitchen 12 years ago, Martha's face, beautiful in the lamplight, as he'd finally worked up the courage to tell her. The way her smile had faltered when he'd confessed his secret, that the fever in his youth had left him unable to father children. The empty ring box still hidden in his trunk, never presented after she'd made it clear she wanted a real family, not a barren man's love. The beans bubbled softly, and the cornbread browned in the Dutch oven's heat. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning through the pine boughs like a lonely thing. Caleb served up 2 small portions, watching as the children ate carefully like they feared the food might be taken away. After the meal, he pulled 2 old quilts from his trunk, shaking out the musty smell of storage. The children's eyes grew heavy as he made them pallets near the stove, tucking the blankets around their small forms. Gracie still wouldn't let go of the powder horn, even in sleep. In the flickering candlelight, Caleb reached for his mother's Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of handling. The familiar words brought comfort, though tonight they seemed to carry new weight. He read quietly, not wanting to wake the children, but needing to hear the verses that had sustained him through lonely years. His prayers stuck in his throat. What words could capture this day's strange turn? How could he ask for guidance when he barely understood what he'd done? He looked at the sleeping twins, their faces peaceful in the dying firelight. A boy who struggled to speak and a girl who wouldn't. What did he know about healing such wounds? The wind rattled the cabin's shutters and Gracie stirred in her sleep, clutching the powder horn tighter. Without thinking, Caleb reached out and pulled her blanket higher around her shoulders. She settled instantly at his touch, and something in his chest ached with forgotten tenderness. He'd wanted children once, dreamed of teaching a son to track and trap, of braiding a daughter's hair like he'd seen other fathers do. Those dreams had died with Martha's rejection, buried under years of solitude. Now here he sat, watching over two small souls who needed more than he knew how to give. Morning light crept through the cabin's small window, painting golden squares on the rough-hewn floor. Caleb stirred the banked coals in the stove, adding kindling until flames licked upward. The twins still slept curled together like fox kits in their nest of quilts. The door hinges creaked softly as he stepped outside. Frost coated the woodpile, and his breath clouded in the crisp air. He needed more wood split before the next storm rolled in. The familiar rhythm of the axe singing through pine logs settled his thoughts, each stroke precise and purposeful. A small movement caught his eye. The children stood in the doorway watching him work. Eli clutched his sister's hand, their faces solemn in the morning light. Caleb nodded to them, then returned to his task. "Can I help?" Eli's voice quavered like a young bird's first song. Caleb lowered his axe and considered the boy. "Reckon you could carry some kindling." He showed Eli how to gather the smaller pieces, stacking them carefully in his arms. The boy's face scrunched with concentration as he worked, but his arms trembled under even the light load. A piece slipped free, then another, until the whole pile tumbled to the ground. Tears welled in Eli's eyes as he stared at the scattered wood. "No harm done," Caleb said quietly. He knelt beside Eli, showing him how to make a cradle with his arms. "Try again, slower this time." Gracie drifted closer, Caleb's powder horn still hanging around her neck. She watched intently as her brother succeeded in carrying a small load to the cabin. When Caleb moved on to feeding the animals, she followed like his shadow, her small boots tracking his larger prints in the frost. The morning passed in a rhythm of chores, mucking the stable, checking his trap lines, patching a loose shingle on the roof. The children stayed close, learning the pattern of his days without a word passed between them. As dusk approached, an unexpected knock echoed through the cabin. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle before he caught himself. Through the window, he spotted a familiar figure, Nora Reyes, the half-Ute midwife from town, her dark hair wrapped in a wool shawl against the evening chill. "Evening, Mr. Briscoe," she said when he opened the door. Her voice carried the gentle authority of someone used to entering homes in times of need. "I brought some things." She held up a basket containing a loaf of bread and bars of soap, their clean scent cutting through the cabin's smoky air. The twins pressed close to Caleb's legs, watching the visitor with wary eyes. Nora knelt slowly, setting her basket aside. "Hello, little ones. I'm here to help." With patient hands and soft words in both English and Ute, she coaxed the children closer. Her examination was gentle but thorough, noting the yellowing bruises on their arms and the sharp angles of their shoulder blades. "They're undernourished," she said finally, straightening up, "but nothing that good food and care won't mend." She reached into her basket and pulled out a jar of honey. "This will help with the boy's throat. Sometimes stammering comes from fear, not nature." Caleb nodded, watching as she showed Eli how to let a spoonful of honey dissolve on his tongue. The boy's eyes widened at the sweetness. "Mr. Briscoe," Nora's voice turned serious. "The circuit judge returns in 2 weeks. There's talk in town about your purchase." She spoke the word carefully, like handling something sharp. "The council may not look kindly on a single man raising 2 young ones, especially given the circumstances." The thought of losing the children sent an unexpected spike of fear through Caleb's chest. "What would you suggest?" "Think beyond tomorrow," she said. "Show you mean to give them a proper home, and—" She hesitated. "Consider allowing me to help. Having a woman's influence might ease some minds." After she left, Caleb sat at his work table long into the night. The children's soft breathing filled the quiet cabin as he sketched rough plans for bunk beds on a scrap of paper. His pencil moved slowly, unused to such delicate work, but the design took shape. 2 small beds, a ladder between them, sturdy rails to prevent falls. He glanced at the sleeping twins, remembering Nora's warning. 2 weeks wasn't much time to prove himself fit for fatherhood, but looking at his sketches, At the peaceful faces of the children he'd somehow acquired, Caleb knew he had to try. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Caleb guided his mule into town, the twins perched carefully in front of him on the saddle. Every footfall of his mount drew curious glances from townsfolk going about their morning business. Eli pressed back against Caleb's chest while Gracie kept her eyes fixed on the mule's swaying mane. "Just a quick stop at Miller's store," Caleb murmured, more to steady himself than the children. The wooden boardwalk creaked under his boots as he lifted them down. Inside the general store, the familiar scent of leather, coffee beans, and tobacco wrapped around them. Mr. Miller looked up from his ledger, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "Briscoe," he nodded, his eyes darting between Caleb and the children. "What can I do for you?" "Need proper clothes for these two." Caleb's voice was gruff but gentle. "Warm coats, boots that fit." Before Miller could respond, raised voices erupted from the back of the store where two men argued over the price of seed. The sudden noise sent Gracie ducking behind a barrel, her small frame trembling. Eli latched onto Caleb's leg, his fingers digging into the worn denim. "Now see here," one man shouted. "That price is highway robbery." Caleb started toward Gracie, but a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Nora Reyes stepped inside, her dark eyes taking in the scene. She moved smoothly to Gracie's hiding place, kneeling beside the barrel. "There you are, little one," she said softly in Ute, then switched to English. "Would you like to help me pick out some warm things?" Gracie peeked out, her grip still tight on Caleb's powder horn. Nora held out her hand, patient as summer rain. After a long moment, Gracie emerged, though she kept close to the wall. "The blue calico would make fine dresses," Nora suggested to Caleb, running her fingers over the fabric. "And these wool coats, they'll last through winter." She helped Eli try on boots while Caleb watched, amazed at how naturally she handled the children. The bell above the door chimed as Sheriff Dunley entered, his badge catching the morning light. He touched the brim of his hat. "Briscoe, might have a word?" Caleb nodded to Nora, who drew the children deeper into the store, before following the sheriff outside. They stood in the shadow of the building, away from prying eyes. "Had a wire from Silverton yesterday," Dunley said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "Seems someone's asking after two orphan children. Man named Harrison Blackwood owns half the silver mines up there." He paused, studying Caleb's face. "Says he's their grandfather." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the wall, rough boards pressing into his palm. "Circuit judge is due in 4 weeks," Dunley continued. "Blackwood's lawyer will likely be here before then. Thought you should know." He cleared his throat. "Them being high society folk and all." Caleb's throat felt dry as creek bed in August. Much obliged for the warning. Back inside, he watched Nora helping Gracie try on a wool coat, the sleeve cuffs carefully rolled up. The girl's face held a hint of wonder as she touched the soft fabric. Eli stood nearby in new boots, no longer stammering as he showed Nora how well they fit. The ride home was quiet, the twins wrapped in their new coats despite the afternoon warmth. Caleb's thoughts churned like storm clouds. A wealthy grandfather, silver mines, high society, everything he wasn't. Everything he couldn't give them. That evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Caleb sat in his chair by the fire, pretending to read his Bible while watching the twins play with wooden animals he'd carved. The flickering light caught the silver threads in Gracie's hair, the determined set of Eli's jaw as he arranged the toys in careful lines. When it came time for bed, Gracie did something new. Instead of hurrying to her quilts, she stood before Caleb's chair. Her small hand reached out, hesitant as a deer at dawn, and slipped into his weathered palm. The touch was light as a feather, but it anchored him to the earth more surely than any mountain route. Caleb's heart clenched as he looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, hers tiny and trusting. In that moment, he knew he'd fight heaven and earth to keep these children safe, no matter what fine houses or silver mines might beckon. The mountain springs settled into gentle rhythms as Caleb found his footing in fatherhood. Each morning brought new discoveries, small victories that warmed his weathered heart. He watched Eli's fingers grow steadier as they worked together, setting rabbit snares in the meadow grass. "Like this?" Eli would ask, his stammer less pronounced when it was just the two of them in the quiet woods. "That's right," Caleb would answer, his voice soft as pine needles falling. "Gentle with the wire, just like I showed you." Gracie took to caring for the old pack mule, her silent presence seeming to calm the beast. She'd stand on a wooden crate Caleb built her, carefully running the brush over the animal's dusty coat. Sometimes her lips would move as if speaking to the creature, though no sound came out. The mule would turn its head to nuzzle her small shoulder, drawing a ghost of a smile across her face. Nora's visits became as regular as sunset. She'd arrive with books tucked under her arm, settling the children at the rough-hewn table to trace letters in the flour she'd sprinkle there. Her patience never wavered, even when Eli's frustration brought tears or Gracie refused to try. "See here," she'd say, guiding their hands. "This makes the sound of wind in the trees. Whoosh. That's the letter W." After the lessons, she'd help Caleb with his own reading, their heads bent together over his father's Bible in the lamplight. Her finger would trace beneath the words, steady as a stream over stones. "Sound it out," she'd encourage when he stumbled. "The Lord gives wisdom to those who seek it." Caleb found himself watching her, the way she moved with such sureness, how she knew just when to push and when to wait. She brought order to their little world without disturbing its peace, like rain settling dust. The night Gracie's screams tore through the cabin, Caleb's heart nearly stopped. He found her thrashing in her quilts, eyes wide but unseeing, trapped in some horror he couldn't reach. Eli huddled in the corner, hands over his ears. Caleb gathered Gracie into his arms, her small body rigid with fear. He sank into the chair by the stove, rocking slowly as his mother had done for him long ago. From some forgotten place, a lullaby rose in his throat, rough and unpracticed but gentle. "Hush now, little one," he murmured between verses. "Papa's here." Gradually, her trembling eased. Her fingers clutched his shirt as her breathing steadied. Just before sleep took her again, he heard it, a whisper soft as moth wings. "Papa." The word echoed in his chest like a prayer. That night, he moved their bedrolls closer to his own, unable to bear the distance. The letter arrived 3 days later, carried by a dust-covered courier who looked relieved to be rid of it. Caleb stared at the official seal, his throat tight. He tucked it into his shirt and waited until Nora's next visit, not wanting the children to see his hands shake as she read it. They stood in the dooryard, spring wind tugging at the paper's edges as Nora's clear voice gave weight to the formal words. "By order of the Honorable Judge William Harrison of the Silverton District Court," she read, "you are hereby commanded to present yourself and the minor children known as Elijah and Grace before this court on the 30th day of May, 1881, to determine matters of guardianship and custody." Caleb's knees felt weak. He leaned against the cabin wall, rough logs pressing into his back. "End of the month," he said hoarsely. "That's barely 3 weeks." "Listen to me," Nora said, stepping closer. Her dark eyes held his, fierce as a mother hawk's. "You're not alone in this fight. These children need you. Anyone can see how they've bloomed under your care. We'll prepare your case properly." Inside the cabin, they could hear Eli's voice showing Gracie the rabbit snare knots Caleb had taught him. The sound of their quiet play twisted something in Caleb's chest. "What can I offer them?" he asked roughly. "Against a grandfather with silver mines?" "Love," Nora answered simply. "Safety, the chance to heal." She touched his arm, her hand warm through his sleeve. "Sometimes the richest gifts come in the plainest wrapping, Caleb Briscoe. Don't you dare give up." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Nora's bay mare kept steady pace beside Caleb's mule as they rode toward town, the twins perched before him on the saddle. Gracie's small fingers traced patterns on the worn leather, while Eli pointed out jackrabbits darting through the sage. "The schoolhouse is just past the church," Nora explained, guiding them down the rutted street. "Miss Willoughby usually arrives early to prepare her lessons." The schoolhouse stood alone on a gentle rise, its white clapboard walls gleaming in the morning light. A brass bell hung silent in the tower, waiting for children's voices to wake it. Miss Willoughby met them on the front steps, her gray eyes kind behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "So these are the little ones I've heard about," she said softly, crouching to the twins' eye level. "Welcome to my school." Inside the classroom, while Nora helped the children explore a shelf of wooden blocks, Miss Willoughby sat at her desk and began to write. Her pen scratched steadily across the paper as Caleb stood awkwardly by the window, hat in hand. "I've seen many children come through these doors, Mr. Briscoe," she said, looking up. "Some from fine homes who never learned kindness. Others from nothing who bloomed like wildflowers when given care. A father's heart matters more than his wallet, in my experience." She signed the letter with a flourish. "I'll be happy to testify to that before any judge." That evening, Caleb sat beside Eli at the cabin table, both of them bent over a slate in the lamplight. Nora had drawn the letters clear and large, showing how they joined to make words. "Cat," Eli sounded out carefully, his small finger tracing each mark. "C-A-T. Cat," Caleb repeated, the strange shape slowly taking on meaning under his son's patient guidance. Gracie watched from her perch by the fire, her eyes bright with interest. The next afternoon brought Reverend Alcott's knock at the cabin door. The circuit preacher's kind face crinkled with smile lines as he handed Caleb a small cloth-bound book. "A children's Bible," he explained, "with pictures. The Lord works in mysterious ways, brother. Sometimes he sends us exactly what we need, though it comes in unexpected packages." He glanced meaningfully at the twins. "I hope to see you all in church this Sunday. It would do the town good to see a family healing together." Sunday morning found Caleb standing before his cracked mirror, attempting to tame his beard with an old comb. He'd dressed the children in their best, Eli in a clean shirt and suspenders, Gracie in the calico dress Nora had helped him. Their boots were polished with bacon grease until they shone. The church bells were ringing as they slipped into the back pew. Caleb felt the weight of turned heads and whispers, but kept his eyes forward. Gracie's small hand found his, holding tight. Reverend Alcott took his place behind the pulpit, his voice filling the simple space with warmth. "Today we speak of how our Lord makes families," he began. "Not always from blood, but from love. From broken pieces, he creates something new and beautiful." The words washed over Caleb like spring rain. He thought of his own brokenness, the years of loneliness, the shame of being unable to father children. Yet here sat Eli, mouthing the words to the hymn beside him. Here was Gracie, her head resting trustfully against his arm. Tears slid unchecked down his cheeks. When he finally looked up, he saw not judgment in the faces turned toward them, but something softer. Mrs. Baker, who ran the mercantile, offered a gentle smile. The blacksmith nodded respectfully. Even Sheriff Dunley's usual stern expression had softened. After the service, several townspeople stopped to greet them. The baker's wife pressed a paper-wrapped loaf into Caleb's hands. "Still warm," she said. "Growing children need good bread." As they walked toward their mule, Gracie still holding tight to his hand, Caleb noticed how the morning light caught in her dark hair, how Eli's steps had grown more confident. Perhaps, like the Reverend said, God was indeed making something new from all their broken pieces. The storm clouds gathered quickly that evening, turning the spring twilight an ominous purple-gray. Inside his cabin, Caleb worked steadily by lamplight, the fresh-cut pine boards arranged carefully on his workbench. Thunder rolled across the mountains as he measured and marked where the bunk bed posts would join. The twins slept on their pallets near the stove, Gracie clutching Caleb's powder horn while Eli snored softly. Every few minutes, Caleb's eyes drifted to check on them, making sure the approaching storm hadn't wakened their fears. His hands moved surely over the wood, shaping joints that would hold firm for years to come. The lamplight cast dancing shadows as he worked the draw knife, peeling away layers to reveal the clean wood beneath. Outside, the wind rose to a howl, rattling the cabin's shutters. The blade slipped suddenly, biting deep into the meat of his palm. Caleb bit back a curse, pressing his bandana against the wound. Blood soaked quickly through the fabric, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, steadily. The children needed their beds. He wouldn't let a little cut stop him. Using his teeth and good hand, he managed to bind the wound tight enough to stem the bleeding. Then he returned to his work, ignoring the throbbing pain. The storm raged on as he carefully shaped each piece, determined to give his children a proper place to rest their heads. Morning brought clear skies and the fresh scent of rain-washed earth. While Caleb fed the chickens one-handed, trying not to favor his injured palm, Gracie watched him from her perch on the split-rail fence. Her dark eyes followed his every movement, head tilted in that quiet way she had. When he returned to his workbench to continue with the bunk beds, she slipped down and followed. Her small fingers found a piece of scrap wood and a dull carving knife he used for simple work. Carefully, precisely, she began to mimic his motions from the night before. Caleb watched from the corner of his eye, amazed at her determination. Her tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated, working the knife in tiny, controlled movements. After a while, she tugged at his sleeve and pressed something into his rough palm. It was a small piece of pine, and there on its surface she had etched a tiny, crooked heart. The sight of it made his throat tight with emotion. He tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket, close to his own heart. The next afternoon brought Nora's familiar knock. She carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper, and her eyes were distant, holding some private sorrow. After checking on the twins, who were playing with wooden blocks in the corner, she unwrapped the package to reveal a faded calico dress. "It was my daughter's," she said softly, smoothing the worn fabric with gentle hands. "I've kept it all these years, though the memories are hard sometimes." Caleb set down his tools, giving her his full attention. The pain in her voice called to something in his own heart. "It was during a raid," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 10 years ago now. My husband, he couldn't bear the grief. Blamed himself, then blamed me. One day he just rode away." She folded the dress with careful movements. "I thought I'd never find purpose again. But helping others, being a midwife, it's given me a way to honor her memory." Caleb listened in respectful silence. Then slowly, he reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew Gracie's carved heart. Without a word, he placed it in Nora's palm. Her fingers closed around the small token as tears welled in her eyes. "She's starting to heal," Nora said, looking over at Gracie. "They both are, and maybe—" She met Caleb's gaze. "Maybe we are too." In the days that followed, Nora worked tirelessly with Miss Willoughby, gathering testimonies from townspeople who had witnessed Caleb's dedication to the twins. The school marm's neat handwriting filled page after page with affidavits, the reverend speaking to their regular church attendance, the baker testifying to Caleb's careful selection of fresh bread for the children, the general store owner noting how he'd bought them warm winter boots. "The judge needs to see you're not alone in this," Nora explained as she organized the papers. "The whole town is standing behind you now." She paused, then added softly, "I'm standing behind you too." Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His wounded hand throbbed beneath its wrapping, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. Outside, Gracie sat in the spring sunshine, carefully carving another piece of wood, while Eli practiced his letters in the dirt with a stick. Their quiet contentment filled him with a fierce, protective love. The morning sun cast long shadows across Timber Hollow's muddy main street when the black carriage appeared. Its polished wheels and matched team of bay horses drew every eye in town. The driver, dressed in a smart black uniform, pulled the horses to a precise halt outside the hotel. From inside the Mercantile, Caleb watched through the dusty window while picking up supplies for the twins. His heart grew heavy as 3 men stepped down from the carriage. The first wore an expensive black suit and silver watch chain that caught the sunlight. His steel-gray hair and proud bearing marked him as a man used to command. Behind him came 2 others, one carrying a leather briefcase, the other wearing a distinctive Pinkerton badge on his vest. "That's Hiram Blackledge," whispered Mrs. Peterson behind the counter. "Mining baron from Silverton. Mean as a rattler when crossed, they say." Caleb said nothing, but his fingers tightened on the paper bag of candy he'd been about to purchase for the children. He watched as Blackledge surveyed the town with obvious distaste, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. The bell above the mercantile door jangled. Blackledge entered, followed by his companions. His cold eyes found Caleb immediately. "So," Blackledge said, his voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern schooling, "you're the mountain man who's taken possession of my grandchildren." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Briscoe, I presume. I'm Theodore Whitcomb, legal counsel for Mr. Blackledge. These children are the offspring of Jonathan Blackledge, deceased, and thus the legal heirs to the Blackledge mining interests." Caleb stood his ground, though his throat felt dry as sand. "They're my children now." Blackledge's laugh held no warmth. "Your children? A backwoods trapper who can't even read? Living in some crude cabin without proper schooling or society?" He stepped closer, examining Caleb's worn clothing. "I've heard about your purchase, $1 for 2 lives. The court will see it for what it is, trafficking in minors." "Now see here," Mrs. Peterson started, but the Pinkerton man shifted his coat, revealing his holstered revolver. "The children are well cared for," Caleb said quietly. "Well cared for?" Blackledge sneered. "In a one-room shack, eating whatever you can trap? No proper beds, no education, no future except more of the same primitive existence?" He turned to his lawyer. "Make a note of the conditions. We'll need it for court." "Mr. Blackledge," Mrs. Peterson tried again, "those children are thriving with Caleb. Anyone in town can tell you. Anyone in this backwater settlement is hardly a character witness." Blackledge cut her off. He fixed Caleb with a hard stare. "I'm their bloodkin, the only family they have left. The court will recognize that above some impromptu purchase." The lawyer pulled out several papers. "We've already filed motions in Silverton. The hearing is merely a formality. Best prepare yourself, Mr. Briscoe." After they left, Caleb stood motionless, the forgotten candy still clutched in his hand. Sheriff Dunley appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Caleb," he said softly, "might want to step into my office a moment." Inside the sheriff's office, Dunley poured 2 cups of coffee with a splash of whiskey. "That man's got friends in high places," he admitted. "Judge Crawford's been known to dine at his house in Silverton, and that Pinkerton outfit, they don't come cheap." Caleb stared into his cup. "The twins are happy, they're healing." "I know that. Town knows that. But Blackledge has money and influence, and blood ties count for a lot in court." Dunley sighed heavily. "Just wanted you to know what you're up against." That evening, after the twins were asleep, Caleb pulled his best wool coat from the trunk. It was still shabby, with patches at the elbows, but it was all he had. He laid it out carefully, then knelt beside the warm stove. The words came slowly, haltingly in the quiet cabin. "Lord," he whispered, "I ain't much. Can't read proper yet. Ain't got money or learning. But these children," his voice caught. "These children need love more than they need silk and silver. Please give me strength to fight for them." The stove popped and crackled, and somewhere in the darkness outside, a whippoorwill called. Caleb remained on his knees, his rough hands clasped in prayer, while his coat waited for the coming battle. The morning after Blackledge's arrival, Caleb found himself standing before the town council in their cramped meeting room above the bank. 5 stern faces studied him from behind a scratched pine table, while summer heat pressed through the windows. "Mr. Briscoe," Councilman Peters began, adjusting his spectacles, "how do you propose to educate these children?" "Miss Willoughby's been helping," Caleb answered, his voice rough from disuse. "Teaching them letters. Teaching me too." "And their spiritual guidance?" another councilman pressed. Reverend Alcott, who had insisted on attending, stepped forward from his place near the door. "Caleb and the children haven't missed a Sunday service since they came together. I can attest to their regular attendance and the genuine nature of their devotion." The questioning continued for over an hour. How would he provide? What about medical care? Could his cabin withstand winter? Through it all, Caleb answered honestly, his responses simple but sincere. That afternoon, Nora found him splitting wood behind his cabin. "I've told them I'll testify," she said, watching him work, "about the children's health. their improvement since coming to you, about your care for them." Caleb paused, axe raised. "Much obliged. They're thriving here, Caleb. Anyone with eyes can see it." She touched his arm gently. "We'll fight for them." The next morning brought crisis. Eli wouldn't rise for breakfast, his small face flushed with fever. Gracie, silent but determined, dragged her quilt next to his bed and refused to move. Caleb's hands shook as he felt the boy's burning forehead. Nora arrived quickly when summoned, her medicine bag in hand. She examined Eli thoroughly, noting the red rash beginning to spread across his chest. "Scarlet fever," she pronounced grimly. "We'll need vinegar compresses to cool him, broth to keep up his strength." Through the long day and longer night, they tended to him. Caleb carried water, stoked the fire, helped change the compresses. Gracie wouldn't leave her brother's side, her dark eyes huge with worry. Near dawn, Eli's fever spiked dangerously. In his delirium, he reached for Caleb's hand. "Papa," he whispered through cracked lips, "don't go." Caleb's throat closed tight. He gripped the small fingers gently. "I'm here, son. Right here." Word of Eli's illness spread quickly through town. By mid-morning, Hiram Blackledge's carriage appeared at the cabin. He burst through the door without knocking, his lawyer close behind. "This proves everything," Blackledge declared, surveying the sick room with disgust. "Primitive conditions, inadequate care. The boy could die in this hovel." "Mr. Blackledge," Nora said firmly, rising from her place beside Eli's bed, "I am this territory's licensed midwife and healer. The child is receiving proper care." "Care? In this dirt floor cabin?" Blackledge scoffed. "They should be in Silverton's hospital under real doctors. I demand they be taken into temporary custody for their own safety." "No," Nora's voice was steel. "Moving a child with scarlet fever is dangerous. He stays here." "I have papers," the lawyer began. "You have nothing that supersedes medical authority in a health crisis," Nora cut him off. "I will not release these children into your custody. The boy is too sick to travel, and his sister won't be separated from him." Blackledge's face darkened. "You're just a half-breed medicine woman. What authority?" "She's the one keeping your grandson alive," Caleb interrupted quietly. All eyes turned to him. He stood straight, though exhaustion lined his face. "You want to help? Send for your fancy doctors, but they'll treat him here where he feels safe, where his sister can stay close, where he knows his Caleb's voice caught for a moment. "Where he knows his papa won't leave him." Gracie, who had watched the confrontation silently, suddenly stood. She walked to Caleb, took his rough hand in her tiny one, and stared defiantly at Blackledge. The message was clear. This was her family now. Blackledge opened his mouth to argue, but Nora stepped between him and the children. "You need to leave," she said firmly. "The boy needs rest, not arguments. Whatever legal claims you have can wait until he's well." After they left, Nora touched Caleb's arm. "You did right standing up to him." Caleb looked down at Gracie, still holding his hand, then at Eli's flushed face. "They're my children," he said simply. "Nobody's taking them from their home." Through the rest of the day and into another night, they continued their vigil. Eli's fever rose and fell like the tide, while Gracie kept her silent watch, and Caleb prayed harder than he ever had before. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and crisp. Summer light streamed through the stained glass windows of Timber Hollow's white-painted church, casting colored shadows across the packed wooden pews. The regular benches couldn't hold the crowd. It seemed the whole town had turned out, along with curious folk from neighboring settlements. Judge Harrison, a weathered man with silver hair, sat behind a makeshift bench fashioned from the pulpit. Caleb, wearing his cleanest shirt and newly mended coat, sat with the twins near the front. Eli, still weak from fever, leaned against him wrapped in grandmother quilts borrowed from Widow Cartwright. Gracie perched protectively on Eli's other side, her small hand clutching Caleb's powder horn. Hiram Blackledge and his lawyer occupied chairs to the left, looking out of place in their fine city clothes. Nora sat directly behind Caleb's family, close enough to touch his shoulder when Blackledge's lawyer rose to speak. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, adjusting his silk tie. "The facts are simple. Mr. Briscoe, while perhaps well-meaning, is demonstrably unfit to raise these children. He cannot read or write. He lives in primitive conditions without proper schooling nearby. He has no blood relation to justify his custody claim, which stems from an irregular transaction of questionable legality." The lawyer gestured toward Blackledge. "Meanwhile, my client is these children's legitimate grandfather, a man of means and education who can provide them every advantage. The choice is clear." Judge Harrison nodded slowly. "I understand Mr. Blackledge has submitted letters from Silverton's doctor and schoolmaster." "Yes, Your Honor, along with bank statements showing his ability to provide." The judge turned to Caleb. "And your response, Mr. Briscoe?" Caleb stood slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "I ain't got fancy papers, Your Honor, but I got witnesses who know the truth of things." Nora was the first to testify. She spoke of the children's physical and emotional improvement, of Gracie's growing trust, and Eli's emerging confidence. "As their medical provider, I've watched them transform from frightened, malnourished waifs into secure, thriving children. Mr. Briscoe has shown exceptional dedication to their care, including during Eli's recent illness." Reverend Alcott followed, his gentle voice carrying authority. "I've watched Caleb Briscoe change from a solitary man into a devoted father. He brings the children to services without fail, teaches them scripture as he learns it himself, and demonstrates the kind of sacrificial love that defines true parenthood." Miss Willoughby, the schoolmarm, testified next. "Mr. Briscoe attends reading lessons alongside Eli, showing remarkable progress. His determination to learn for his children's sake speaks volumes about his character and commitment." Widow Cartwright, her gray hair neatly pinned, spoke last. "I've lived in Timber Hollow 40 years, Your Honor. I've never seen a man work harder to make a proper home. Those children glow with health and happiness now. They belong with their papa." Throughout the testimony, Blackledge shifted impatiently, whispering to his lawyer. When the witnesses finished, he stood abruptly. "This is absurd. These backwoods people can't possibly understand what's best. I can give those children everything. Proper education, social standing, opportunities they can't imagine in this wilderness." A small movement caught the judge's eye. Gracie had risen from her seat, her face set with determination. She walked to the front, her steps steady, and tugged at Nora's skirt. The room fell silent as she whispered something in Nora's ear. Nora's eyes widened. She knelt beside Gracie and whispered back. Gracie nodded firmly. Then, in a clear voice that startled everyone who knew her history of silence, Gracie spoke aloud for the first time in years. "Please don't take us from our papa." The church went absolutely still. Caleb's hands trembled as tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. Eli struggled to his feet, still wrapped in quilts, and stumbled to join his sister. He's our pa now," he added, his stammer less pronounced than usual. "We want to stay home." Judge Harrison leaned forward, studying the children intently. "Young lady," he said gently to Gracie, "how long have you been unable to speak?" Gracie looked at Nora, who nodded encouragingly. "Since Mama died," she whispered. "But Papa makes me feel safe again." The judge sat back, removing his spectacles to wipe them slowly. The morning light through the stained glass windows seemed to brighten, casting a warm glow over the scene. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the hushed church. "Mr. Briscoe, would you please stand?" Caleb rose slowly, his broad shoulders straight despite the trembling in his hands. The morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, earned from years alone in the mountains. "Sir," the judge said, "I'd like to hear from you directly. Why should these children remain in your care?" For a long moment, Caleb stood silent, his weathered face working with emotion. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but clear. "Your Honor, I reckon I never thought to be standing here like this. Years back when I learned I couldn't father children of my own." He paused, swallowing hard. "Well, I figured God had closed that door forever. Drove me deep into the mountains, away from folks and their pity." He glanced down at the twins who pressed closer to his legs. But these little ones, they made me a man again. Gave me purpose beyond just surviving. His calloused fingers fumbled with the buttons of his coat. When Gracie here started leaving me little gifts, pine cones, pretty rocks, it was like spring after the longest winter. From inside his coat, Caleb carefully withdrew a small piece of wood, holding it up so it caught the light streaming through the stained glass. The rough carved heart stood out clearly, its edges smoothed by being carried close to his chest. She made this for me. First time she showed me she trusted me. His voice grew husky. Ain't much to look at, maybe, but it's worth more than gold to me. Nora leaned forward in her seat, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. Around the church, several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Even the sheriff, standing at the back, looked away and cleared his throat. I know I ain't educated, Caleb continued, but I'm learning my letters now, right alongside Eli. I know my cabin ain't fancy, but it's warm and dry, and there's love in it now. These children... He had to stop again, composing himself. They ain't just some property to be claimed. They're my heart now, beating outside my chest. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, his lined face thoughtful. He turned to study Hiram Blackledge, who sat stiffly in his fine suit, looking increasingly uncomfortable under the judge's scrutiny. Mr. Blackledge, the judge said firmly, I've heard a great deal about your wealth and position, but I've heard nothing about love, nothing about sacrifice, nothing about understanding what these children have endured. He picked up his gavel. You speak of blood ties and inheritance, but you view these children as property to be claimed, not souls to be nurtured. Blackledge started to protest, but the judge held up his hand. No, sir, I've heard enough. This court's duty is to determine what serves the best interests of these children, and I have rarely seen clearer evidence of where those interests lie. The judge straightened in his seat, his voice taking on formal authority. It is the finding of this court that Caleb Briscoe has demonstrated extraordinary dedication, love, and fitness as a guardian. The petition for custody by Hiram Blackledge is hereby denied. Full legal guardianship of the minor children, Eli and Grace, is granted to Caleb Briscoe, effective immediately. The crack of the gavel seemed to release something in Caleb. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the wooden bench, pulling the twins close as tears streamed freely down his face. Nora immediately moved forward, wrapping her colorful shawl around all three of them, her own tears falling as she embraced the newly affirmed family. Around them, the church erupted in joy. Widow Cartwright was openly weeping. Miss Willoughby clutched her Bible to her chest, beaming. Reverend Alcott raised his hands in a gesture of blessing, his amen carrying over the happy commotion. Hiram Blackledge and his lawyer gathered their papers and slipped out, but hardly anyone noticed their departure. The townspeople were too busy surrounding Caleb and the children, offering congratulations and support. Through it all, Caleb kept his arms wrapped tightly around his children, legally and forever now, as Gracie nestled against his chest right where her carved heart had rested, and Eli's fever-warm face pressed into his shoulder, their tears mingling with his own. Behind the whitewashed church, tables appeared as if by magic. Women hurried home and returned with steaming dishes wrapped in cloth. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh biscuits and roasted chicken across the churchyard. Children scattered wildflower petals along the grass while men arranged benches in the dappled shade of old cottonwoods. Caleb stood at the edge of it all, still dazed with the twins pressed close to his legs. His rough hands kept touching their shoulders, as if reassuring himself they were truly his now. Widow Cartwright bustled past with a berry cobbler, its sweet aroma making Eli's eyes light up. Never seen such a spread put together so quick, Sheriff Dunley remarked, helping to set up another table. Reckon the whole town was hoping for this outcome. Miss Willoughby organized the children into a line to serve lemonade. A celebration of family is always worth a feast, she declared, her usually stern face softened with joy. Nora moved through the crowd with natural grace, helping to arrange dishes and direct traffic. Her dark hair gleamed in the afternoon sun, and her smile seemed to light up the whole gathering. Every so often, her eyes would meet Caleb's and something warm would pass between them. "Mr. Briscoe," Reverend Alcott called out, "won't you say a few words?" The happy chatter quieted as people turned toward Caleb. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention, but knowing he owed these folks his gratitude. "I ain't much for speeches," he began quietly. "Been alone so long I nearly forgot what it was to be part of something bigger." He looked down at the twins, then out at the gathered faces. "Thank you all for helping me remember, for seeing what these little ones needed when I could barely see it myself." Gracie tugged at his sleeve then, pointing to a patch of purple wildflowers growing along the church wall. Caleb nodded, understanding her silent request. She darted over and carefully gathered a handful, her small fingers working deliberately. When she returned, she walked straight to Nora and held out the bouquet, her eyes shining with trust and love. Nora knelt down, accepting the flowers with visible emotion. "They're beautiful, sweet girl," she whispered, pulling Gracie into a gentle embrace. The afternoon passed in a blur of food and fellowship. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the churchyard, folks began to pack up their dishes and head home. Soon only Caleb, the twins, and Nora remained, watching the last golden light paint the western sky. Eli had fallen asleep on a bench, worn out from the excitement. Gracie sat beside him, fighting to keep her eyes open. Caleb touched the wooden heart in his coat pocket, the one he hadn't taken off since the day Gracie gave it to him. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he knew with sudden clarity what he needed to do. "Nora," he said softly, drawing her attention away from the sleeping boy. "These past weeks, you've been more than just kind to us. You've been our anchor." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "When my life was nothing but silence and solitude, God sent me these children, and then He sent me you." Nora's eyes widened as Caleb reached into his coat and withdrew the carved heart. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to her. "I ain't asking from duty or gratitude," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm asking because my heart recognizes its home in you. Would you consider joining our family? Being a mother to these little ones and a wife to a man who loves you?" Gracie was fully awake now, watching with held breath. Nora looked at the wooden heart, then up at Caleb's earnest face. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she smiled. "God works in mysterious ways," she whispered. "He brought healing to all of us through each other." She reached out and closed his fingers around the heart, keeping her hand over his. "Yes, Caleb Briscoe. Yes, with all my heart." Gracie leapt up with a cry of joy that woke her brother. Before anyone could blink, both children had thrown themselves into Nora's arms. "Mama!" they cried in unison, Eli's voice clear and strong, Gracie's soft but certain. It was the first time either had used the word since coming to Timber Hollow. Nora gathered them close, her tears falling freely now. Caleb wrapped his arms around all three of them, his own eyes wet as the last light of day blessed their newly formed family, one built not of blood, but of grace and love and second chances. Morning dew sparkled on the grass as Caleb sat on his cabin steps, carefully working a piece of pine with his carving knife. Shavings fell at his feet while the sun climbed higher over the mountains. He held up two wooden rings, examining them in the light. Though simple, they carried the marks of careful craftsmanship, smooth and polished, with tiny crosses etched into their surfaces. Inside the cabin, he could hear Nora humming while she helped the twins dress. The sound made his heart swell. Through the open door drifted the scent of coffee and fresh bread, mixing with the crisp mountain air. "Papa, look!" Eli called out, his voice stronger now that his fever had broken. The boy emerged wearing his best shirt, hair neatly combed. Behind him, Gracie twirled in a dress Miss Willoughby had altered, her eyes bright with excitement. Nora appeared in the doorway and Caleb's breath caught. She wore a simple blue dress, but in her dark hair gleamed a silver and turquoise ribbon, a treasured piece from her late mother. The morning light caught the beadwork, making it shimmer like water. "You look like an angel," he said softly, standing to meet her. A wagon rattled up the path, carrying Widow Cartwright and several other women laden with flowers and baskets. More townspeople followed on foot and horseback, making their way to the creek where Reverend Alcott waited under an ancient cottonwood tree. The morning air filled with cheerful greetings and laughter. Someone had strung ribbons from the lower branches, and they danced in the breeze above the gathering. Children scattered wildflower petals along a natural aisle through the grass. Caleb took his place beside Reverend Alcott, his hands clasped to still their trembling. The twins stood close by, Eli holding a Bible almost too big for his small hands, Gracie clutching a bouquet of mountain flowers. When Nora appeared at the head of the path, a hush fell over the crowd. She walked slowly toward them, sunlight dappling her face through the cottonwood leaves. Her smile, warm and sure, never left Caleb's face. Reverend Alcott's voice carried clear and strong over the sound of the creek. Dearly beloved, we gather here to witness God's grace made manifest in the joining of these two hearts, and in the blessing of this family he has brought together. Caleb's voice shook slightly as he spoke his vows, but his eyes remained steady on Nora's face. When he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, she touched it tenderly, understanding the love carved into every grain. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, Reverend Alcott proclaimed. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their first kiss as married couple was gentle and sweet, accompanied by happy cheers from the gathered community. The twins rushed forward to embrace them both, and for a moment, they stood wrapped in a family hug while the cottonwood leaves whispered overhead. The celebration moved back to the cabin, where tables groaned under the weight of pies and cakes. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon the air filled with music. Children played tag around the yard while adults visited on the porch. Gracie, who had always stayed close to Caleb or Nora, ventured out to join a group of girls making daisy chains in the grass. Her quiet laugh drifted back to where Caleb stood watching, and his heart felt ready to burst. Quite a change from that gray morning at the trading post, Sheriff Dunley remarked, joining him with a piece of apple pie. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Caleb replied, watching Eli teach another boy how to whittle with a stick. As evening approached, folks began to head home, leaving behind well wishes and enough food to last a week. The twins, worn out from the excitement, fell asleep early in their bunk beds, still wearing their good clothes. Caleb and Nora sat together on the porch steps, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The evening air carried the scent of pine and distant rain. From somewhere in the forest, an owl called softly. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, her new ring catching the last light. You know, she said quietly, that day at the trading post when you laid down that silver dollar, you didn't just buy 2 children. She turned to look up at him, her eyes shining. You bought a miracle. Caleb wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Looking out at the peaceful evening, he felt a deep sense of rightness settle in his soul. Here, surrounded by the love of his family and the blessing of community, he had found something greater than he'd ever dreamed possible. Weeks after the wedding, summer settled over Timber Hollow like a warm blanket. Morning light streamed through the cabin windows, catching dust motes that danced above the swept wooden floor. The garden out back had doubled in size, with neat rows of corn, beans, and potatoes stretching toward the sun. Caleb knelt in the soft earth beside Eli, showing him how to thin the carrot seedlings. The boy's small hands worked carefully, tongue stuck out in concentration as he copied his father's movements. Like this, Papa? Eli asked, his stammer barely noticeable now. That's just right, son, Caleb answered, pride warming his chest. Give them room to grow strong. Near the cabin, Gracie and Nora worked at the wash tub, their skirts tied up to keep dry. Steam rose from the hot water as they scrubbed and wrung out clothes. Gracie had taken to following Nora everywhere, soaking up domestic skills like a sponge. Her silence had given way to quiet humming as she worked, matching the tune Nora often sang. The clip-clop of hooves drew their attention as a rider approached. It was young Tommy from the telegraph office waving a letter. Mrs. Briscoe, he called out, dismounting. Letter from Miss Willoughby. Nora dried her hands on her apron and accepted the envelope with thanks. Caleb and Eli joined them as she broke the seal and read aloud. Dear friends, she began, smiling. I'm pleased to inform you that both Eli and Gracie have been officially enrolled for the fall term. Their places are secured, and I look forward to having them in my classroom. Gracie clapped her hands silently while Eli bounced on his toes. Caleb felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. His children would have opportunities he never had. The next morning, Caleb hitched up the wagon he'd spent weeks rebuilding. He'd replaced the worn boards, greased the axles, and added a new spring seat. The whole family climbed aboard, dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Thursday. As they rode into town, the wagon wheels hummed against the packed earth. Eli pointed out hawks circling overhead, while Gracie held tight to her slate board, a gift from Miss Willoughby. Nora sat close to Caleb on the seat, her presence steady and warm beside him. Timber Hollow had changed in their eyes. Where once Caleb had felt judgment and isolation, he now saw friendly faces. Sheriff Dunley tipped his hat as they passed. Mrs. Henderson waved from the mercantile porch. Even old Mr. Peters, who rarely acknowledged anyone, nodded respectfully. They stopped at the general store for supplies. While Nora helped the twins pick out new pencils for school, Caleb settled their monthly account. No longer just trading furs, but selling fresh vegetables from their garden too. The ride home felt lighter somehow. The setting sun painted the mountains gold and purple, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine. Eli fell asleep against his sister, who watched the passing landscape with contented eyes. Nora reached over and squeezed Caleb's hand. That evening, after a simple supper of cornbread and bean soup, Caleb tucked the twins into their bunk beds. He smoothed Eli's hair back and straightened Gracie's quilt, marveling at how natural these gestures had become. "Good night, my treasures," he whispered, using the name Nora had given them. He found her by the hearth, adding wood to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel especially cozy. Above the mantel hung the small wooden heart Gracie had carved, now framed and displayed like the precious thing it was. Caleb wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, both of them gazing at that simple carved heart. It represented everything that had changed in their lives, all the pain, hope, and healing that had brought them to this moment. "You know," he murmured softly, "I spent years thinking God had said no to my prayers for a family." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "Turns out God didn't say no. He just waited till I was ready." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.